Okay, let's just wait for them to join. All right. Welcome everyone to our last Master Your Future event of the series for this semester. Today we have Dr. Surprenant, and she is going to talk to us about the science and psychology of living a rich life. Over to you, Dr. Surprenant.
Okay, thank you very much, Aimee, and thank you, Trey, for inviting me to this event. I'm really excited to join you. I want to preface this presentation by saying that I used to call this happiness, and happiness is something that I've spent some time looking at the literature and trying to figure out how to help people figure out how to have a happy life. Because I've decided that I'm no longer interested necessarily in the word success, because success means so many different things to so many different people. And so, as the graduate dean, my goal for all of the graduate students and also anyone who's listening today is to help them figure out how to have a rich life, one that is has a lot of meaning to it. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the data that are in this area, but I should warn you before I get started that almost all of these data are correlational. So what that means is that things go together, but it doesn't necessarily mean that one thing causes something else. So you need to interpret all of the data that I'm going to be showing you today as a relationship, not necessarily a causal relationship. So with that caveat, and then one more caveat, that these are averages, right? So they're averages, and many of the sample sizes are very large, 100,000, 200,000. But so what that means is that that you may not find yourself fitting into the average category. So again, it's just a bit of a caveat before I get started. So first, the question that you might ask is how to measure happiness or life satisfaction. And it turns out that just asking a very simple question, such as, taken all together, how would you say things are these days? Would you say that you're very happy, pretty happy, or not too happy? And this is a question that is used by the US General Social Survey, which has about 40,000 Americans approximately. It turns out that happiness really is a function of a number of variables. And so you can actually state it in terms of an equation. And economists tend to do this. And so happiness with this measure is a function of age, gender, income, education, marital status, diet, other personal characteristics, region characteristics, and country characteristics. And it turns out that the structure of this happiness equation actually seems to be pretty similar, regardless of the population that you are looking at. And so Dr. Oswald, who's a British economist, has spent his career actually looking at happiness. And he's found that regardless of who he asks, in what culture, these are the main factors or the main variables that are adding to or predicting happiness. So for those of you who are have a little bit of statistics, you should see that there is a correlation, a function, and some of these variables are ones that that you can control, and there are others of these variables are ones that you can't control. So my advice is always to people when they're trying to come up with that maximum happiness number to focus on those variables in this equation that they can control and to ignore those that they can't control. But we'll be talking about some of the relationships as we go along. So the first thing I want to talk about is the pattern of happiness as a function of age. And this U-shaped figure is very typical of the data that you get, again, no matter who you ask, where the younger people tend to be fairly happy. Happiness declines throughout our young adulthood to a low in the neighborhood of about 41 to 50 years old, and then it climbs and climbs and climbs. And what is interesting, and it's not on this figure, but it doesn't go down. It continues to go up as you ask older and older people. They tend to report more and more happiness. Now, one of the interesting things about this whole thing is that happiness very often is a contrast to other people, and so, or to yourself at a different point in time. So when you're thinking about a 90-year-old and asking how happy are you, they will normally say that they're very extraordinarily happy, and that's probably in comparison to some of the other people that they're hanging around with. If we look at the relationship between money and happiness, there is absolutely a relationship, but it is not a necessarily entirely linear relationship. So what this figure has is it's got income on the x-axis and mean life evaluation, which is just another measure of happiness, on the y-axis. The various lines are the amount of education level an individual has. So the high is high level of education, moderate is moderate level of education, low is low level of education. They've also broken it down by women versus men. And what you find is that happiness or mean life evaluation increases up to a particular point, and this dot is where the mean life evaluation starts to go down. And you can see that it actually, that inflection point is different depending on the population that you're looking at. But in general, people are, there is an increasing amount of happiness or mean life evaluation as a function of income, but that it doesn't continue to go up. So it plateaus at a particular point, and there's been some speculation that it even, as you get really, really high in income, that it actually starts to decrease. We have lower numbers down here, and so the estimates aren't quite as good, but essentially what you can conclude from this is that money, yes, can buy you happiness, but only up to a point. And after you get to that point, it doesn't increase anymore. There is a caveat, and that is a finding that using your money to buy time can actually make you happier. So the data show that people who prioritize time report greater happiness than those who prioritize money. So if you use your money to buy time, like hiring someone to clean your house or going on a vacation, those sorts of things, compared to buying things like cars and houses, the people who buy time are happier. So any occasion we're spending our money results in us saving more time, including buying positive experiences, has reliable and positive effects on the happiness that we get from our days, our weeks, our months, and our lives. What's the relationship between education and happiness? It is actually quite significant that the more education that you have, the happier you are, the fraction happy. And I should point out here, this axis is very small, okay? So that's 80% is the minimum of people who are very happy with their lives, and 95% is the top here. So it's a very small scale, but even so, you can see a linear relationship between the number of years of schooling and the fraction of the population who say that they're happy or very happy. They've controlled it by income. So the white bars are conditional on income, and the trend isn't quite as pronounced when you control for income, but still education is correlated with or related with happiness. So the more education you have, the happier you tend to be. Happy people are also healthier. So in general, happier people have lower rates of cardiovascular disease, better immunity to viruses, et cetera. They heal faster after injuries, more likely to have a healthier diet, and they live longer. Now, again, these are correlations, and they're all intercorrelated. Certainly, education and income are also correlates of all of these different things. And so it's hard to parcel all of that out. But even so, when you do the analyses and you parcel out income and education, you still find that happy people are healthier. But what's interesting is that happiness isn't just about you. When you are happy, the people around you are better off. So happy people are more productive at their jobs. They typically have deep relationships with others. They help others and volunteer more. They're more likely to donate money to charity, and they're more creative problem solvers. So being a happy person actually isn't just about you. It also leaks out or goes out into your environment and affects the people and the environment around you. Now, happiness is not always feeling happy or feeling hunky-dory all the time, having all the money you could ever want, refusing to see the negative stuff. And it's not a final destination. It is something that we continually are working on or continually are getting towards more and more happiness. So what I've given you so far is a bit of a summary of what you might call the economic viewpoint on happiness and measuring happiness. So generally, economists are trying to predict one thing versus another. They're doing all these correlations. And they've also, and Dr. Oswald has a huge amount of data on what they call gross national happiness. So they can measure the happiness of particular nations and find out which nations are happier than others. That's a very economic way of thinking about the world and about happiness. Psychologists take a slightly different viewpoint, and they try and think about the constructs that are behind happiness. And they typically conceive of happiness in two different ways. So there are multiple aspects to happiness. It's not just a single construct. So they typically conceive of it as what's called hedonic happiness, pleasure and enjoyment, eating, sleeping, taking a nice long bath, things that are physically pleasurable, and eudaimonic happiness, or meaning and purpose. So getting up every day and having meaning to your life. Those are two of the factors that psychologists think about when they think about happiness. But recently, research has suggested that there's a third dimension of a good life or happiness, and that's what's called a psychologically rich life, or a life characterized by a variety of interesting and perspective-changing experiences. So this is pretty relatively new work by Aimee and Westgate, talking about a third aspect of psychological happiness, which is having an interesting and variety of experiences. And what's interesting about this particular study is that the three dimensions are very different. And so a person can have different weights, basically, on how much these particular things contribute to their lives. And so just basically this happy life, which is the hedonic happiness, is comfort, joy, security, money, time, relationships, positive mindset, and personal satisfaction. Measure that with life satisfaction and positive affect. The eudaimonic is a meaningful life, which has, if you have significance and purpose, a reason to get up in the morning, moral principles, consistency, you've got good relationships, religiosity fits into this area, and societal contribution. So how much are you contributing can actually be very meaningful to people. And so they measure this by thinking about meaning in life and subjective meaning. What's interesting about the psychologically rich life is that for both the happy life and the meaningful life, there's a positive and a negative, and you can go either from comfort to discomfort, from joy to unhappiness, from purpose to purposeless. But the psychologically rich life, there are lots of negative experiences that actually can add to having a psychologically rich life. So some of the challenges and obstacles that we encounter can actually and do actually make us happier in the end. Some struggle in life actually helps us live a richer, more meaningful life. And so these variables are not always positive. So variety doesn't always have to be something that you enjoy, um, but it it gives you that perspective, I guess, is the easiest way to say it. So perspective change, curiosity, time, energy, spontaneity, and wisdom. All of these um, lead to or contribute to a psychologically rich life. So when we're talking about happiness from a psychological standpoint, all three of these seem to give significant weight to what a good life actually is for people. So when we look at the data, trying to figure out how we as individuals can be fulfilled, the first one or first piece of advice that we get from the literature is to make sure that you have time for friends. So on days when people spend 6 to 7 hours with friends or family, they're 12 times more likely to report feeling happy rather than stressed. People who work full time experience the most happiness on days when they actually spend time with friends and family. Make the most of those weekends, spend time with friends and family, or make friends at work so that you've got time to spend with friends at work. Finding different ways or different ways people find meaning in their lives through a fulfilling career. Some people actually find that to be the best way to have a meaningful life through spirituality or religion. Those who are spiritual or religious tend to be happier. It also religion and spirituality will normally give you a nice built-in social network. Raising kids, 85% of parents think that their children bring them the most happiness and fulfillment of any relationship, and pursuing goals that align with our core values. So committing to something outside of our lives. So there's that that sort of selfish happiness that you get with all of the physical things that you do, but adding that meaningful part, thinking outside ourselves, contributing to others, actually promotes life satisfaction. And then the third aspect, those varied experiences. And this is actually hard for some people because getting out of your comfort zone is by definition uncomfortable. And so choosing the unexpected over the safe and secure, taking risks from time to time. And again, what's different about this is that this rich life is not always filled with happiness or pleasure. The negative experiences actually can give us a broader frame of reference and lead eventually to more happiness. And what's important is it doesn't necessarily, varied experiences doesn't necessarily mean that you have to travel or you have to have a lot of money. It's more of a change in perspective. So finding people who are not like you and interacting with them, learning about another culture, going places where you're perhaps not entirely comfortable is a really helpful way of getting some fulfillment in your life. What's important is having a change in perspective, being able to see something from someone else's perspective. And so the advice that comes out of this is to embrace adversity. And people, so we don't necessarily want to chase after adversity, but if you are in a situation or you come up with a situation that is adverse to you at a particular time, you should try and remind yourself that this will actually end up making us happier in the end. The challenges that we encounter and overcome are very positive in the long run. And getting some distance from that particular event helps us make sense of our life's challenges. It helps us shape our identities, increases our resilience. We're better able to cope with stressors. One of the things that I find graduate students very often have a lot of difficulty with failure. And part of that is because they haven't really experienced any failure in their lives. And so they don't have a lot of experience to fall back on when they fail. So trying to find situations where you're stretching yourself and perhaps failing is a great way to put in some safeguards against failing later on. And it also helps us become more optimistic about the future. So I've been talking about what is good for happiness, or good for having a full or a good life. But what's bad for happiness? And there are two really important things that are really terrible for happiness. And the first one is boredom. And boredom is really something that that leads us to be very very difficult people. So this particular experiment study that I'm talking about was actually an experiment. So this isn't correlational. And what they did was that they brought people into the lab and manipulated how bored they were. So they gave them a really, really boring task to do for about 30 minutes, or they gave them an interesting, I think, a video game to play. And what they found was that in these random samples of people that were brought into the lab and made either bored or not bored, those people who were bored actually were more sadistic, and they were more likely to kill worms or destroy other people's pay. They did a bunch of different experiments. And so what's kind of interesting is that this is moderated by some personality traits, which are high dispositional sadism. If you're bored, then it makes it much worse. So, but when there's no alternative, the only thing that you can do is either kill the worms or destroy other participants' pay. Then boredom increases sadistic behavior across the board, even among individuals low in dispositional sadism. So what this keeps reminding me of is what happens on social media. Is that I think there are a bunch of bored people on social media, and they just are mean because they're bored. And so if you find something to do, then you're going to be more happy and less mean to other people. So the other thing that destroys happiness is envy. Again, Dr. Oswald, who's an economist, has done a lot of studies on envy as a powerful predictor of worse mental health and well-being in the future. So they did a longitudinal study of 18,000 adults and found that those people who are continually looking outside of themselves and comparing themselves to others are less happy and have worse mental health. And they end up not as well off in the future. So one thing that's really important to think about when we're thinking about what we do on a day-to-day basis is that comparing ourselves to others, particularly if you're envying someone else, if you're looking at someone else and saying, why don't I have what they have, that's not a productive way of going about your life, and is actually a powerful predictor of really bad health, mental health, and unhappiness. I should note that when Dr. Oswald and others look at the gross national happiness, what they find is that there's a sort of interesting and hard to understand negative correlation between gross national happiness, and number of suicides. So you find that the highest happy countries, those that are the highest in the happiness, tend to have more suicides than those that are low in happiness. Now, there's not a firm explanation of this. However, what Oswald and others have speculated is that if you're in a place and everyone around you is happy and you're not happy, that makes it much worse. If you're not happy and everyone around you is also not happy, then you kind of feel like you're average. So this is where that envy thing, that comparing to one another, is actually can be really exceptionally bad, particularly if you are in a place where you are an outlier in one case or another. They also find that folks who are in really economically depressed places are not as upset about being unemployed as people who are in a place where there's a lot of economic growth. So again, it's that comparison, that contrast between how you're doing compared to others. Again, we can get around this by trying not to be envious of others. So the way that I want you to think about and conceptualize a good life is a life well lived from the perspective of the person living it. So I've given you a lot of data, a lot of things to think about in terms of perhaps manipulating your life so that you can get towards that goal of happiness. But that's going to vary depending on the individual. So some people will weight that hedonic happiness a little higher than others, that they really need that comfort, that physical comfort, etc. Others will value the varied life experiences more than the hedonic happiness, and others will value that uh, service to society part of happiness. So your job as a person is to try and figure out what the weights are on those various aspects of happiness and try to maximize your that happiness equation by maximizing those things that from your perspective make you happy. So again, I've been talking about this in terms of averages and those three constructs. Oh, sorry. I had a weird sound in my ear. Is the sound okay on me still? Okay. Again, trying to figure out what the weights are for you on those particular aspects is the most important thing. So again, what are you interested in? Do what floats your boat. What's your passion? Trying to figure that out and then following that. And I love this flowchart. Take a look at yourself. Are you happy? Yes. Well, then keep doing whatever you're doing. If you're not, do you want to be happy? Some people actually kind of enjoy being unhappy from time to time. And if you don't want to be happy, then keep doing whatever you're doing. But if you want to be happy and you're not, then change something. And with that, I'm going to stop my presentation and open the floor up for questions. Comments?
If anyone would like to post questions in the chat, I'll be monitoring that. So then I would read them out if you would like that. We have one thank you so far. So there's a question. What has been your experience with these types of studies?
So my experience, so I'm a cognitive psychologist, and my research and my publications are on human perception and memory. So I haven't engaged in these studies myself. I've read the literature and taken a look at the variety of studies, but I have not engaged in the research myself.
Hi, Dean Amy. Thank you for the talk. I really appreciate it. I was wondering, back when I was an undergrad in like 2014, we were talking about the happiness relationship with money, and it capped out at like 75,000. And the one you showed us now was slightly higher than that. I'm wondering, like, is it found that it's correlates to inflation as well? Does that number keep going up as inflation goes up, or what?
Yeah, absolutely. So what you need is you need at least enough to keep yourself housed and clothed and fed, and then a little bit more. So yes, it would continue to go up as inflation goes up. Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you, Cassidy.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll ask a
Juan,
question.
oh, go ahead.
Thank you for sharing the research and insights on the topic. I'm looking for like an actionable insight out of the talk. So assume I fall into the happy category, though of course I might have sadistic behavioral traits as much as the next person. But let's say someone I care about may not necessarily be in that happy category. I want to help them, so maybe I invite them to activities, but you're suggesting that maybe this may not always be the best approach than being in an environment with other happy people. So what could I do?
That's a really good question. One of the weird things about uh, our physiological state of unhappiness or sadness or stress or whatever is that it actually affects our memory. And so people who are clinically depressed have a really hard time remembering ever being happy. Because there's this sort of state-dependent memory that happens, and if your state is so bad, then it's really hard to get yourself back into that or remember those things. And so the advice that I've always heard is to actually have them um, consciously try and remember happy events um, and try and get them to make a list of all of the things that made them happy, and then use that rather than your idea of what would make them happy. So so it's more of a so when we think back to events, previous events, we in addition to consciously remembering the event, we often have a physiological response that's similar to that event. We recreate it in some senses. And the people who are clinically depressed can't do that physiological thing very easily, but they can do the mental part. And so trying to get them to remember that with the idea that with enough of those instances, they can actually start to feel that physiological feeling of happiness again. It's not that satisfying. I'm sorry, Stephen, but that's the the best way I think is to try and figure out what made them happy, and then try and get that recreated.
I get the
Sorry.
message. Thank you.
Yep.
I just want to put a little note in here. I've attended a session that was, I think, hosted. It's like a event that I saw on the graduate school listserv, but it was open for everyone, for undergrads and graduate students, and it was the How of Happiness. And it was presented by a lecturer, Vicky. I don't remember her last name, but I can put in the text. But she does a small course on the How of Happiness, and I think she then gave us very practical advice on like how to encourage your happiness. So it's like doing something small for someone, or buying someone a coffee, or go out to nature and like see something that you really find fascinating, and investigate that. So I feel like if you're looking for a practical application, maybe I can refer you to that. So I will see what I can find by Googling it quick, and then I'll post it in the chat for everyone. So there's another question, unless someone wants to add something to what I just said. Okay. So there's a question. I couldn't get the exact difference between psychologically rich life and a meaningful life, because to my experience, they are pretty close.
So the key distinction is that the the meaningful life is contributing kind of to society. And it doesn't have to be, it could be, volunteering at your church every week. So it doesn't necessarily have to be varied. It doesn't necessarily have to bring you out of that comfort zone. Whereas the psychologically rich life means that you have to sort of step a little bit closer to the edge and get a little more risk in your life. So you can be you can have that meaningful life without any risk. So the important part about that rich life, the psychologically rich life, is that there is a bit of risk. And I see that there's a question in the chat about kind of that exact thing. How do you balance that rich life and managing the sense of insecurity along with it? Because when we put ourselves into a risky situation, when we try something new, there is the chance that that we'll fail, and we will very often have a lot of insecurity. So, Faishan, my advice is don't jump off the cliff. Just get as close as you are comfortable, and then push a little bit farther, but not too far. So all of us have a very different definition of what's risky for us. And so push yourself a little towards that risky, but not too much. I can tell you I will not be jumping out of any planes. So Juan, did you still have a question?
Yes, I still have a question. Thank you for the talk. Let's see, my question is about this idea of insecurity and security with regards to failure and wanting to jump out of your comfort zone. What would you say to somebody who's really struggling with that fear of failure and kind of stuck in their comfort zone, not wanting to venture out of it?
Yeah, I mean, again, we all have very different tolerances for that kind of getting out of your comfort zone. So I think you just need to figure out where you are on that continuum and put yourself a little bit on the risk side, but not too much. So when we look at performance as a function of physiological arousal, you see that there's a U-shaped, upside down U-shaped curve, but everyone's curve is different. And so some people perform really well when they're really stressed, and other people just can't. And so trying to figure out where you are on that continuum is the best advice that I can give. And I know that's not very satisfying, but
no, that's helpful. Thank you.
We have
Dong
a
Mai.
question,
Oh, sorry,
and
go
then I was
ahead.
thinking of going to Cassidy, if that works.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So the question was, may I have some advice on balancing of pursuing a psychologically rich life and managing this sense of insecurity along with it?
So I think I've already answered that one.
Okay, cool. The next one was, then I work closely with highly productive research group who publish journal articles. That is way more than anyone. This somehow causes stress or I totally get lost how to manage this. Please advise. And then Cassidy.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've struggled with in my life is that sort of feeling like I'm actually not producing enough, and that I'm a slacker. When I read the accomplishments of others, I'm very often like, I read this one grant proposal where this person had published like 100 articles and had done all of these things, and then I look in her explanation for delay in activity, and she had twins that year, and I was just like, what? So I think you just have to say everyone is different. Everyone has different amounts of time that they can spend being productive, and you really can't compare yourself to others, and that others are probably feeling the same thing about you, that they're envious of the things that you can do, and so I think that is comparing yourself to others is just really never going to be productive. And remember, or we remember the things that we do better than we remember the things that other people do. So we know what we're doing, and we know that we couldn't possibly be that productive. But you don't know what the other people are doing, and you don't know how they're getting to be that productive, and possibly they're doing things that you just really never would want to do. So you look at the data on. I'm always looking at the data on CEOs, right? And they find that most women are not, or most CEOs are not women. But would you want to be a CEO? I mean, would you do the things that you need to do in order to run a company like that? I personally would never choose to do that. So I'm not envious of the people who do. So that's just, I don't know whether that's a helpful.
Thank you. Cassidy, your question?
So I was wondering, because I think it'll give me meaningful insight. Are there any hypotheses out there about why wealthier individuals they start to get less happy? Like, I'm wondering what's going on there. So because if I understand the negative direction, then I can avoid whatever they're doing.
I have to say that I don't know the data on this, but my speculation is they get bored.
Okay. I was wondering if it was like they feel like they don't have a challenge anymore, or
yeah, that's a similar kind of idea. Yeah, I would say that's my speculation, but I don't have the data to support that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
If there are no more questions, I would like to take this time to say thank you, Aimee, for presenting for Master Your Future. I really enjoyed this presentation, and definitely we want people to be happy in what they are doing. And again, we appreciate your time and effort to demonstrate this information to our students, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Anli, thank you for facilitating the conversation, and thank you all for being here and participating. Go out and be happy. Have a great day.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.